Who wins in this culture these days? Well, if, for example, the runoff election between Jeff Sessions and Tommy Tuberville is any indication, the guy who won, Tommy Tuberville, former football coach, put his ads in an unnamed football locker room, and he was not above flexing his muscles in front of the camera. Strong endorsement from the president, and who won in that election was the loudest, the most, what's the word? Arrogant? Who wins in the street? Often the angriest. The person who can get the best attention of the most people at any particular time. That's the climate in which we presently find ourselves. And so it is an odd word. If this word that Jesus gave in the gospel reading this morning were read in front of a demonstrations in front of City Hall in Orlando, it would sound like a very odd word indeed. And yet, this is the command that we, as the people of God, hear Jesus say to us. So it's really important to look at what's going on and why it is and how it is that he says what he does. He's actually making this invitation, this command, in the midst of a time of high drama. John the Baptist is in prison. And for many people, his going to prison indicated that maybe he wasn't all that he said he was. And so Jesus goes at great lengths early in this chapter to in fact defend the ministry of John the Baptist, even while he is speaking words of very clear and public judgment against the nation of Israel for rejecting his ministry. This is not gentle Jesus speaking words that somehow are soothing. And so everybody's wound up. I mean, it would be really natural for many of his disciples to assume, well, if John's been taken to prison, is Jesus next? And if that's true, what's going to happen to me? And what's going to happen to my family in the midst of the iron fist of the Roman rule? They could take out anybody that they liked. Particularly, and if Herod is willing to do that to one of his own countrymen in John the Baptist, who in fact is safe. The kind of stress and grate that creates on everyone might cause us to hear Jesus' words, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden," as in essence an invitation to find a mattress. But what's interesting is that he doesn't give them a mattress. He actually gives them a piece of equipment for work. Take my yoke upon you, and learn from me. For I am gentle and lowly of heart, and you will find rest for your souls. In other words, the way that we find rest for our souls is to assume the yoke of Jesus. To be willing to allow him, who's right there with us, to take the lead. Because that's often what happens. If you have two oxen and you've yoked them, they really aren't full partners. One's just slightly ahead of the one leading the other. And we're in that point, you see, invited to take the position in the yoke with Jesus. He is, in essence, to change animals, the lead dog. Our responsibility is, in essence, to keep up, to follow the same pace. And he describes his pace by saying, who am I? I'm gentle and lowly of heart, and you will find rest for your souls. In other words, what he's inviting us into, the place of rest into which he invites us as his people, first of all, is to turn to him. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden. And that's not as easy as it sounds, because particularly when you're in that place of the kind of high drama activity that Jesus is describing, which some of us can certainly feel in the kind of climate that we live now. And now what we don't want to do particularly is go to Jesus. We just want to take a break. We actually want the mattress. Whether that's escapist television or you fill in the blank. It actually takes a certain level of helplessness. The realization that other temporary relaxation techniques in the end don't touch the depth of the soul. It is to those who actually have the capacity to admit, I've tried the other things, and there is in all of them an absence of that tonic which actually brings refreshment to the soul. I don't want temporary. I want something new. And it is to that group. You see, I thank you, he proceeds by saying that who he's going after, as it were, are the weak, meaning the little ones, which is the phrase he uses, which means those who are keenly conscious of the fact that their efforts to try to create solutions for themselves is not a winning formula. And that in fact there is inside of them a hunger that those things are not satisfying. And it is out of that, and not too far from desperation, that there is room in our hearts to be able to receive and to hear the invitation that Jesus gives. I mean, it's Jacob wrestling with the angel that causes Jacob to walk with a limp for the rest of his life. It is the work that God does to, in essence, humble us. Because that's what he's looking for. But because proud souls that we are, humility is not a particularly natural attribute for most of us. And therefore God has to do a work in our lives to, in essence, create the reality of the humility which was always our appropriate portion, though we may have chosen other things instead. And it is that humility that gives us, in essence, the capacity, God's grace at work at all points, creating that kind of hunger in us, that allows us to be willing to say to him, you know, as much as I need a mattress, I'm just going to wake up and it's just going to be as bad as it ever was. Okay. I yield. And then allowing him to lead. And out of that, discovering a way to live that is very contrary to even often the very best of our intentions. Because humility is in fact the fruit of God's ongoing chastening work. It is never anything to which we have arrived. Just the opposite. We're more and more conscious as the days goes on, how much I still want things to go my way. And God has to keep prying our hands open. But in the end, I really believe with all my heart that when God chooses to judge the world, he will not choose between red states and blue states and Republicans and Democrats or people who are on the right side of any issue. What would be far more important to him, and in fact is the characteristic distinction between sheep and goats, is humility instead of arrogance. My hope for myself, as well as us, is that we will find ways, that God will help us to find ways to yield to God's humbling work far more quickly than we do. Not only to spare ourselves some pain, but also to know and to learn in a whole new way, particularly in the demands of what is going on in front of us, that humility is in fact the key to great wisdom, to to genuine contentment and the capacity to see things as they are rather than how we want them to be. It is, in fact, the key to wisdom. May God work in us the command that Jesus has given us, that we might find rest for our souls and walk in a way that allows us to keep in step with the one who, even in the worst of circumstances, continues to operate out of that kind of pristine humility, regardless of wherever he is. Amen.
Amen.